Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, a Pittsburgh Steelers podcast made by fans like you, for fans like you. Now, here's your host, Joe Kuzma.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. You know, today, I don't really have an agenda or a script, and, a lot of times I just fly, by the seat of my pants right here when it comes to what I talk about on this podcast. I usually have like a main focus or a main topic, but, we're right in front of the draft here. The draft's coming up on Thursday, and we're all anxious. We're all excited, and I guess the first place I could really start with talking about anything and all the different news that's out there is... Well, I could rewind maybe just a little bit. Over the weekend, and I try to get ahead of this, and it was going to be, I try to record sometimes in advance, and it always ends up coming around and biting me in the rear end, okay? I was talking about Josh Norman, and I was talking about how some of these moves, like the Rams and the Eagles making their draft picks, trading for these draft picks, would impact the Steelers draft board, because you don't know who the Eagles are looking for in their original position, or the Rams. I mean, the Rams, they could be looking for a defensive lineman that the Steelers are looking at. You just never know what's going on. The Eagles could be looking at a corner or a safety or somebody in the secondary. And we assume that these two teams move up to position themselves to get the quarterbacks that are out there. And the Browns drop down, and we don't really know what Cleveland's ever going to do. Not that it ever matters. They screw it up all the time anyway. And yeah, you know what? That's a good place to go. I saw an awesome article this weekend that was just, I really wish I could have commented on it or repurposed it into my own article, but it was just such an amazing piece of work of all the different analysis, research, the statistics and numbers that went into just the NFL teams and what type of values they get in the draft. And I put it out there. It's out there on Twitter, out there on Facebook if you guys want to go out and take a look at it. It's out there on Google Plus too if you're one of the one or two people that actually use that service. But I play in Google Sandbox. I like to show up in Google Search. So it's there. Just kind of take a look for it. But even if you have to search yourself, it's from the Washington Post, and it has to do with the draft values. And they ranked all 32 of the NFL teams. I think it was from 1996 to the present day. And there were people arguing about what's a draft value, and they were talking about, average NFL careers, and that had something to factor into it. And I read comment sections a lot on some of these articles just to get an idea of what people are thinking. And, one of them says, well, you can't necessarily say that so-and-so like AJ Hawk has such a great draft value just because he lasts in the NFL for a long time. Well, you know what? Anybody who has a long career in the NFL, and I said this on a podcast, and this was in one of my articles last week, and anybody who's been around long enough that is able to retain their spot on a team or with several teams definitely has some sort of value, because you'll see that you're going to have, like, I don't even know, like these rosters right now are, I think, at 90, they're going to be at like 90 players. Somewhere in the ballpark of get trimmed down to about half. And some of those players will end up on practice teams. And, I'm not doing like actual, hardcore mathematics here. I'm just going to throw out a ballpark figure that anywhere from 1/4 to 1/3 of these players they just vanish. They will be gone by the time we have the opening kickoff weekend for the NFL. So if you happen to last several seasons, it has to be some type of value to the team. I mean, even Landry Jones has some type of value, right? I mean, even if he doesn't see the field, maybe not the best draft value, they're probably going by what they contribute to that team. Anyway, where I'm getting at, and I said the Browns would screw it up, and I've been lamenting how good of a general manager Kevin Colbert is, and how more often he gets it right than gets it wrong. And never in my wildest imagination would someone for like a major newspaper go out and do this statistical analysis and not only pretty much prove what I've been saying right, which makes me feel good. I like saying, hey, toot my horn, I was right. But I would have never in my wildest dreams imagined that the Pittsburgh Steelers would rank number 1 in terms of what they get for draft value. But at the same time, I'm not surprised that the Cleveland Browns rank absolute dead last, 32nd. And I know I'm going to keep my voice down here in my in-home recording studio so my wife doesn't hear me talking about the Cleveland Browns. I might upset her a little bit, but even she knows. I don't even think she cares about the draft, to be honest with you, because they just know that they blow it. And a lot of other teams blow it. So I'm happy, I'm anxious, I'm excited to see what the Steelers are going to get this year. What kind of value are they going to get? What type of players are the Steelers targeting? And you have this press conference that's put on, and they're talking about painting the barn red, and if you have a red barn and you have a red stripe and you have red paint the barn red, or whatever it had to do with painting the barn. I get what they're saying. The Steelers are going to get players who fit their system. Yeah, it's no big surprise. That's what all these teams do. Everybody has a different system. I want to say it was Ross Tucker this morning on NFL Sirius XM radio, and he's talking about how it would have just been great to stick with one offensive line coach. He bounced around, kind of a journeyman offensive lineman. I think it was Ross Tucker. Forgive me if it wasn't Ross. He's one of several guys who run the morning show over there. And he's absolutely right. And he brought up the Cleveland Browns. And it's a good example of when you're constantly changing coaches and you're changing your coaching staff. The Steelers have had the luxury of pretty much the only real drastic change they had in recent memory was Todd Haley. Even when Mike Tomlin took over for Bill Cowher, they retained Dick LeBeau, and the defense was pretty much status quo. And then you have Kevin, thinking Kevin Colbert because my brain's on the draft, but Keith Butler is like a disciple, like a student of Dick LeBeau. So the apple isn't falling too far from the tree. The systems are pretty much staying the same. You don't have a defensive guy coming in and we're going to shatter everything from a 3-4 to go to a 4-3 or vice versa, or all these other gimmicks that have played out throughout the history of the NFL, like the run and shoot offense and these West Coast offenses. And you have these pistol formations now, and you have, read option. Yeah, read option. Where did that go? Remember when no one was going to be able to defend that? Now it's like, a one-hit wonder there. So it's very tough when these players are always changing from team to team, or even within the same club, having constant merry-go-round of coaches for them to ever succeed. So yes, the draft value for guys to be able to hang around that long, or they have to be able to adapt and change just as quickly as the things around them are changing. So the Steelers are going to use the red paint for the red barn. They're going to get guys who fit their system. They're not going to go after like a guy who is primarily going to play in a 4-3, or you know what I mean. They've had some success with some college defensive ends and making them into outside linebackers in their 3-4 system, and there's a lot of things that fit scheme. So even if a player that seems like they might make sense to a common fan like you or I falls into that position of where the Steelers are drafting, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's a player that fits their system. It's very important. It's kind of they're deliberately vague, okay, in their press conference. So Tomlin and Colbert are saying these things, and they're droning on for 28 minutes of just they talk about Senquez Golson, and of course they're going to say, oh, he's like an extra draft pick this year, we treat him like that. But then of course when we start talking into what are your expectations of Senquez Golson, well, we expect him to be good, but we don't expect him to be great. And it almost sounds like a politician talking, doesn't it? I mean, they're not going to tip their cap on anything. Or, if you're a general in war, you're not going to give your battle plan to the opponent. So they're not going to go out and say, hey, you know what, guys? If we just so happen to have, Keanu Neal, the one safety, what was he, out of Florida? Let me take a look here real quick. Keanu Neal, safety, and I think I'm trying to see. He was one of the first guys. Yeah, so he was one of the Florida Gators. They're not going to say, okay, we're looking at Keanu Neal, and if he's there at 25, we're taking Keanu Neal, because you know what else? There's somebody else that's looking at Keanu Neal, And they might say, hey, you know what? We'll give you a 4th-round draft pick if we could swap our number 1 picks and jump ahead of the Pittsburgh Steelers because we want Keanu Neal, and we know they're looking at him and they're going to take him if we don't. We saw this last year. I said it before. The Baltimore Ravens thought that the Steelers had interest in Minnesota tight end Max Williams. And so what did they do? They trade to jump ahead of the Steelers and make sure that they took that. And it was like some big, feather in their cap that they had this big victory and they stole a pick from the Steelers. Like, you know what? So what? That's the type of stuff that's going to happen. And you kind of have a blueprint for what this, even if the Steelers aren't coming out and saying, hey, we're going after Keanu Neal or Carl Joseph and some of these guys that we're looking at, you have a blueprint, okay? The Steelers went to some of the different pro days. They interviewed players and dined with players during the various pro days and the NFL combine. So we have an idea of what they're looking at. The official pre-draft visits, they had 30 of them. And give or take how you want to classify some of the defensive backs, there are 18 defensive backs. I have them broken out as 10 safeties, 8 corners. And then they're also looking at 6 defensive linemen. So they have 24 and then 25 if you count the one linebacker from Akron, Jatavis Brown, that they looked at. They looked at 25 of the 30 guys are on defense. And some of their pro days, some of the guys are looking at, they go to Ohio State. Look at all the guys at Ohio State. You have the one linebacker, his name's escaping me. You got Noah Spence, who's one of the edge rushers. You have Eli Apple, who's a cornerback. You have Von Bell, who's a safety, who they also had a pre-draft visit with as well. So very much so, focus on the defense. I think that's where the Steelers are going. I'd be extremely happy with many of the names that are popping up. We're going to have a special article coming out here within the next day where I've pulled many of the wonderful fans, friends, other sports writers and bloggers that I've met across the blogosphere, the interwebs, and social media, whatever you want to call it. And they're out there, we're talking. And I say, hey, you know what, guys, who are we going with? And none of us can agree. We have a few people that are in agreement, and the names are popping up like Eli Apple. Some of us think like Carl Joseph. Some of them are very surprising, to be honest with you, because they're guys that I wouldn't think either. And a few of the names, I'll tell you 2 of the names that if the Steelers don't go necessarily with the safety, I'm thinking this draft is very deep on safety. I could be proven wrong. There might be a run on the position, but I'm thinking that the scarcity of top-level players at the other positions and also the focus on a lot of these teams going after quarterbacks. I mean, the Jets might take a quarterback too. It'd be 3 quarterbacks. You could have 4 or 5 gone in the first round if the Denver Broncos go that way or the Cleveland Browns go that way as well. That would be very beneficial for the Steelers. The Patriots don't have a pick, so there's one team without a first-round pick entirely. So there's only 31 picks in the first round. That's going to be very beneficial for the Steelers to maybe have one of these safeties fall in the second round. And I'm thinking maybe some of the other teams think the same way too. And I'm just kind of hoping if you have a name like Billings or the nose tackle out of Baylor, if he comes and falls to the Steelers at 25, that was the pick from Ike Taylor with the NFL Network's mock draft that they did. Ike Taylor was saying how Billings led his conference in tackles for a loss and how this player, he could play all the different techniques along the defensive line. This guy's a monster. He could do it on his own. That would be fantastic. But if we don't grab a defensive tackle in the first round, my heart will not be broken, nor should yours. If the Steelers happen to go with the safety, that might be great. They might get the top or second best guy available just based on how the landscape of this draft may fall. That would be great too. There's also another corner, and I don't think that a lot of the corners they've been looking at lend themselves to being first round, maybe even second round picks. And I'm not the best guy for projections. It's really not my strength, but I'm just going based on some of the different scouting reports that I've read and in discussion with some of my peers. And William Jackson III, and a lot of people want Eli Apple. I get it. William Jackson III, I think, is the ideal fit for the Steelers should he fall. He kind of reminds me of that Marcus Peters type player that they were pegging for the Steelers, but that ended up with the Chiefs last year. And if Jackson's there at 25, my heart will not be broken whatsoever. Eli Apple, I'm not sure that he will be there. And it always makes you wonder because Mike Tomlin has and Kevin Colbert and that whole kind of organization, that whole front office, they love Ohio State Buckeyes. And there are a slew of Ohio State Buckeyes this year in the draft that could all contribute in the NFL. You've got everyone. You've got Ezekiel Elliott, who's not going to be anywhere outside of the top 10. I'd be very surprised at running back. You have Michael Thomas, the wide receiver. You even have Braxton Miller, who converted from quarterback to wide receiver. Cardell Jones, who was the Cinderella story as a quarterback. He's in this draft. The tight end also, his name, Vennett. His name almost escaped me there. And then you have all the defensive players that I mentioned too. And I'm not just trying to be like a Buckeyes guy, because I know that supposedly Mike Tomlin likes this Keon O'Neal guy too. He had a little bit of an injury history. The guy out of West Virginia too, Carl Joseph, a little banged up, and they think that he might not even be ready to start training camp. That might scare some teams away and might provide an excellent value if the Steelers feel he will be healthy enough and be a player to contribute. But I just want to remind everyone in closing, in this big long draft rant as we're gearing up for the NFL draft, I think it was something like 14%. And I'm trying to think of where I saw the statistic. It was ESPN or it was one of the TV shows, but it was like 14% of the players drafted last year were actually some type of major contributor to that team. Most of these guys do not play in year one, or they are not significant contributors. And a lot of times they end up as significant contributors only because the guy that they're playing behind gets hurt and they're thrown into the fire, and that's how they have to learn. So just as a quick rundown, this is what the 2016 draft is going to look like for the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Steelers have, and I'm pulling it up here, so give me 1 second. The Steelers do have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 picks, but they are lacking a 5th round pick. Just as a little reminder, their 5th round choice was traded to the Philadelphia Eagles for cornerback Brandon Boykin last year. It was a conditional pick. It could have been a 4th round choice, but of course we know Boykin rode the bench, and that was pretty much why, because the Steelers didn't want to give up a round 4. So the Steelers, they lost that pick. They did pick up a compensatory selection in round 6, despite trading their original 6th round selection for kicker Josh Scobie. Yes, I know that one stings, but they needed a veteran kicker, and that's who was available. Jacksonville gets the better part of that deal, in my opinion. That's one of those things where the value didn't work. Scobie makes some field goals, you win an extra game there, right? So the Steelers will be drafting number 25 overall in the 1st round. 2nd round, they're at 58th pick overall, and then 89th, 4th round, 123rd. Then they have to wait almost 100 picks in the 6th round before drafting in the 6th at 220, and then the 7th at 229 and 246. So they will have 3 choices at the tail end of the draft within 26 picks of each other after waiting 97 selections. So you're going to be sitting around quite a bit on Saturday just waiting for the Steelers to get those selections in. But sit tight, folks. This one's going to be fun. I'm very excited to see what the Steelers do. Don't be surprised if they don't go after a linebacker or a wide receiver or an offensive lineman somewhere in this draft. I do expect them to be heavy on defense. I expect a defensive lineman. I expect a safety. And I even expect a cornerback. But there's only so many picks. As Kevin Colbert did say today, one thing that you can take away from that press conference is the Steelers don't have a whole lot of ammunition to move up in this draft to take another player. But they're not opposed to moving backwards and acquiring more picks. Stay tuned for the NFL draft, and for those of you guys who weren't already aware, the 2016 Steel City Underground Draft Preview is a free ebook we're offering on our website. Go over to steelcityunderground.com, sign up for it. You'll have all of these pre-draft visitors, all of the picks, the selections, the position the Steelers are in, their former picks, even some of the guys they've visited in the past that have ended up becoming Pittsburgh Steelers. It's a great little piece of work that I put on here. And all you need to do is go over to steelcityunderground.com, sign up for free, and you'll have that in your hands. You'll be prepared, and you'll know what the Steelers are going to do on draft day. Be good, and I will talk to you guys more than likely after the 1st round of this year's draft.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.